Hello, and welcome to another episode of AP Taylor Swift, the podcast for Swifties who like to dive a layer deeper into the music. So lean in close, turn up your volume, because class is in session. We're your hosts. I'm Monty.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jody.
And we are your unofficial professors of Taylor Swift.
Welcome back to AP Taylor Swift as we transition out of our summer school and back into our regularly scheduled episodes. We're bringing you an episode that we are very excited about. I think we've been talking about this for like a year. We wanted to do this probably since we started. We are doing All Too Well 10-minute version, and we are bringing you this song through 3 different lenses. So Jen, Monsi, and myself have each picked a lens through which to discuss this epic. It's an epic. It's an epic poem. Maybe not literally. I don't know. That's a topic for another day. Jen, I think you've got the first one. You want to kick us off and we're going to dive right in because this is a big one. It's going to take us a while.
I, unsurprisingly, am bringing a whole new lens to this, whereas the other two are being thoughtful and kind to our listeners and revisiting a lens we have used in the past. But this is a lens I've really wanted to do. I've really wanted to talk about narratology, which is just looking at the narrative structure of a poem, a story, whatever it may be. And there's several that Taylor has that I would like to do this with at some point, but this was obviously, it's big, it's a larger story. We have many more lines and stanzas. So it's a really good time to think about this. But I also think this is one of the bigger storytelling songs. She loves storytelling, don't get me wrong, folklore, evermore, we have a lot of that, but this 10-minute version is just so much that it's just so much storytelling is happening here, and it's so poetic. So narratology, narrative theory, whatever you want to call it, there's so many ways that this works. If you Google this and you see something different than what I'm about to say, that doesn't surprise me. But at a high level, it's typically looking at the structure of storytelling. And if you think about that, storytelling, the most common, I say that in quotes, is chronological with an introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, conclusion. You probably did that in middle school or something where you charted out those elements of a story. But of course, there's a lot of different ways stories can be told. You can have frame narratives, you can have flashbacks, you can have all of those things. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the elements of All Too Well, the 10-minute version. The way that All Too Well tells the story is that it has these vignettes of different points in the relationship that are clearly flashbacks, but then you have a present day reflection, exploration, trying to make sense of it, and it goes back and forth. It actually reminds me a little bit of The Last 5 Years, the musical, where it's different points of the relationship out of order, and you see the love story and you see the breakup, and it goes back and forth. But in All Too Well, you have these interspersed moments of maybe we got lost in translation, maybe I asked for too much, these moments of wondering what happened, can I make sense of this, along with those little moments of the stories of the relationship.
They're memories, right? This song has memories of those vignettes are the memories, the experiences, and it feels like they're weaving those memories together to try and understand the full relationship.
I think there's multiple ways to do this, so this is super arguable, but I made 4 categories of the moments in the songs from just a narrative structure. So we have happy memories, which is immediately right off the bat. I walked through the door with you, the air was cold, but something about it felt like home somehow. Or even we were singing in the car, getting lost upstate. So we have these moments of happy memories. We have these moments of bad memories, but all I felt was shame, and you held my lifeless frame. You said if we had been closer in age, so these moments of things falling apart. Then we have commentary. I know it's long gone. I'm a crumpled up piece of paper. So these are present tense commentary. And then we have those moments of trying to make sense of it. Maybe we got lost in translation. So those were the 4 categories I saw: 2 past tense, good and bad memories, and 2 present tense, commentary, acknowledgement of the present state, and then reflection on what actually happened and trying to understand where things went wrong.
It's interesting as you're categorizing these memories. One thing I noticed, at least just from the lines that you brought up. I haven't gone through the whole thing through this lens. The happy memories reflect experiences. They seem happy because of the experience themselves. Something felt like home. But the sad memories, she uses her feelings more. What was the second line that you mentioned?
You said if we had been closer in
Closer.
age.
Oh, maybe it was but all I felt was shame. You held my lifeless frame, right? So my question to you was going to be like, what tells you that the happy memories are happy? Because the sad memories are clearly emotionally laden with these very devastating emotions. I'm using the same word twice, but the happy memories aren't, it's not as clearly happy, right? Dancing around the kitchen in the refrigerator light evokes happiness without saying that she's happy, whereas the sad memories or the negative emotions, running scared, I was there, so casually cruel, it's more clear and direct.
I think there are some negative memories that are also referring back to a moment like turning 21. I'm trying to just find the line. Does that really have an emotion associated with it?
That's the section about her father, about how this other person charmed my dad with self-effacing jokes, sipping coffee like you're on a late night show. But then he, her father, watched me watch the front door all night, willing you to come. And he said it's supposed to be fun turning 21.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of one where we have the happy memory and a negative memory side by side, because she is thinking about how he can charm her father 1 second, happy clearly, or something that she's in awe of, but then the next second there's a negative memory that it switches to, not quite with an emotion, but that is interesting that she uses emotions so frequently to try to turn the emotion to negative. I don't think it's exclusive, but I'm trying to now see, I'm like, are there any happy memories with any emotion in them at all?
I think it felt like home somehow is a very positive emotion. That one, I think, to me is pretty straightforward. But from a narratology point of view, just looking at the narrative structure, what she's doing with these potential plays with emotion is she's moving the plot forward.
Exactly.
As the song moves on, every time we get a happy memory, it turns bad pretty quickly, which is a development, just a narrative development. And in those two, I think a big turn is the story about her father that we just talked about, and then it's supposed to be fun turning 21, and then it transitions into time won't fly. It's like I'm paralyzed by it. I'd like to be my old self again, but I'm still trying to find it. So again, we move to that present tense. So the structure of this in that particular moment is really compelling because it's saying, hey, you were so great. My dad loved you. Oh, but then my dad saw me be devastated. I think I might be paralyzed right now and not able to move on from this. And how quickly that the structure of those three moments tells us so much about what's happening and moves the plot forward of together, breakup, devastation.
And I'm noticing that she kind of starts with something happy and then breaks it down really quickly. Photo album on the counter, your cheeks are turning red. Used to be a little kid with glasses in a twin-size bed in that same verse. Till we were dead and gone and buried. Check the pulse and come back swearing it's the same. And you have that again with dancing around the kitchen in the refrigerator light. You know, nobody had to know you kept me like a secret. Like that's pretty devastating to be kept like a secret, but I kept you like an oath. And then it just keeps going negative. I feel like there's not many turns after that. It just keeps going down.
And the question that we always ask with any sort of a lens is, what is the impact or the effect of this? Because of course she could have written the song many different ways. And homework assignment, if you wanted, dear listeners, something I like to do with these types of narrative structures, I used to have my students rewrite a story that we read and change one element of it. They could either change the narrative structure or change the setting or change the point of view. So in theory with this, you could write this from the other person's perspective. You could take this song exactly as it is and plop it in Bridgerton's setting and write it from one of those characters' point of view.
I love that.
Or if we're really talking about narrative structure, what if the song was written chronological and we started with what we believe to be the earliest part of the relationship and we tracked it through and then we had the sad moments, and then we had the reflection. And that would be a completely different song because it would be much more once upon a time this happened and then things fell apart and all of that. But what this song does by changing the narrative structure, to me, my theory is that it recreates that post breakup experience of, oh, I just remembered something happy. Actually, that reminded me of something bad. I guess I have to process this again. It does that cycle in a way that a, point A, point B, point C narrative structure would not have that same effect.
It's a roller coaster. I think that the narrative structure evokes the roller coaster of emotions of a breakup. It is not a linear experience where you just feel one thing or you kind of transition nicely from one emotion to the next. It is up and down and chaotic. And I think you're right, Jen. Like the narrative structure is what kind of gives this song the emotional depth and devastation that it has because of the way it evokes what it feels like to go through a breakup.
And this is a strategy or a device, I think, that's really commonly used in country music. So this song was released on her album Red, which was her kind of hybrid transition, not quite pop, but not really totally still country. And I think one thing about this song that I love so much, and I'll talk about this a little bit when we get to my topic as well, is she's repeating the same lines again and again in every chorus, but she changes it every time as you do. The chorus is not exactly the same. You're moving the story forward with every single chorus as well. And that is in such a storytelling way that you have scenario one, here's how the chorus wraps that up. Then you have scenario two, and then the chorus wraps that up. It's the same chorus as the first one, but slightly different. Something crucial has changed to keep taking it forward. Then you'll go into scenario three and then the chorus. And I feel like that's something that I see a lot in country music, where you have a little bit of the storytelling element. Even though you'll have three choruses, just like any other song, they all move the story forward somehow to take the listener on that journey with them. And that all kind of builds up to a climax towards the end, very similar to what you might see in a book or a movie. You've been building up to this moment and then there's a resolution.
And this is a 10-minute song.
Yeah.
It needs to be a story. It needs to have a narrative structure. Otherwise, what are you doing? What are you listening to for 10 minutes?
Totally. Although I would argue even the original version of the song
Yes,
still
that's
had
true.
that. And then the 10-minute expanded on it even more and really leaned into that storytelling.
I would agree with that. Wow. Jen, thanks for kicking us off with some narrative structure. Good way to ground ourselves in this song. I'm going to now take us to a topic that when we first did it, I was really confused by, and now I have come to love it. Ecocriticism and eco-critical theory. We did this, I think it was episode 7 was our eco-criticism episode. And eco-criticism, as a very brief reminder, focuses on the relationships between human beings and the natural world. And when I think of All Too Well, and when I think of Red, I think of fall. And again, we talked about this in our fall episode. I don't know what episode that what number that was, but it is back there. Ironically, All Too Well only mentions fall once. It says autumn leaves falling down like pieces into place. So that's why I thought of eco-criticism. And then I had to go through the song to be like, okay, wait, what else is there? I picked out 4 different natural references that I want to talk about today. The first is in that very first line, the air was cold. And Jen, you talked about this a little bit as a happy memory, something about it felt like home. But she starts out with something negative. I walked through the door with you, the air was cold. How do we know that air was cold is a negative association? Because the next word is but. So you turns the phrase. But even though it was cold, it felt like home somehow. So we're starting off this whole song with something negative, and to me, something that evokes discomfort. And the question this brought up for me is, why does the narrator feel comfortable in the cold? And what does that say about both the narrator and the relationship that she is now going to discuss, that she feels comfort in this coldness? Or is it the relationship that's bringing her comfort in this coldness? I don't know, but that was the first kind of thing I thought about. that we're starting right out of the gate with something natural yet negative.
Oh, it might just be my personal bias, but I actually don't think of it as a negative. I personally prefer fall and winter to spring and summer.
Same.
So to me, that is it's cold outside, it's fall, but it felt like home somehow of like it's cold but then you go inside and it's cozy because you have a home and a place that outside the world is cold. That's the way I've always read it.
Yes, I think it could definitely be that outside was cold, but inside with you, I feel comfortable. But there's still something uncomfortable about the cold, and we're starting out with discomfort.
I actually think that maybe because we've heard this song a million times, we get this unsettling feeling because of
Possibly.
even clues that she's given us later on in the song. Because, for example, towards the end, she says, "'Cause in the city's barren cold, I still remember the first fall of snow and how it glistened as it fell. I remember it all too well." And here you have this imagery of barren city, not like no nature in sight.
No nature.
Is kind of the way that I think of that. First of all, city in general, we've talked extensively, even in our original episode, how that contrasts with maybe the countryside, or how cities tend to have less nature. They tend to have more
Industry.
But then on top of that, to call it barren, it's like not only is it a city, is it a deserted city, an empty city? It feels cold. So I don't know if that is what is just carrying on and helping to set the stage, but that's kind of what I was thinking of.
We do have a lot of internal versus external in this song. So again, we walked through the door. We're literally starting the song off, going from outside to inside, from the natural world to the domestic space. And again, felt like home, your sister's house, a scarf in the drawer. We talk about, the kitchen, refrigerator light in the kitchen and the twin size bed. Like there's a lot of domestic space here. Yet the line that, to me, when I think of this song, I think of autumn leaves falling down like pieces into place, and I can picture it after all these days. So it's a rather domestic setting of a song, yet the feelings feel like fall and autumn and outdoors and nature, which maybe that's just me. Although it is reinforced by a little bit by the album aesthetics and the short film / music video.
I think there's a sense of not knowing exactly where they can be together, perhaps.
Interesting.
Because you're right, outside it's cold, inside it's cozy. And then the next one, we're in the car going upstate. So then we're going away from the city where there was the beautiful snow. And then soon after, we're on a little town street. So it's, are we outside? Are we inside? Are we in a big city? Are we in a small town? The location is jumping around a lot. And because I did narratology, my brain will continue to think about the narrative structure throughout this entire episode. But in the same way that she's jumping around from moments of the relationship and then they're physically jumping around in places, there isn't ever a moment in the song where you feel like things are settled.
Never.
You really don't have longer than one or two lines where something is like, oh, this is kind of nice, before it immediately, the rug is just ripped out from under your feet. And we're seeing that in the location too, which is really, I'm intrigued by that. I never noticed that, but they can't pick a place to be.
I love that you use the word settled, because the other line I wanted to talk about was the one I just mentioned. Autumn leaves falling down like pieces into place, and I can picture it after all these days, because you have autumn leaves falling down. So autumn leaves fall when they are literally dead. So again, we've talked about in previous episodes autumn as a symbol of death and change, because it is literally when the trees die. Yet she's saying that these autumn leaves are basically puzzle pieces, and they fall into place and you find each other and things just fit together, which I find very interesting to bring those two things together. The decay, something that symbolizes decay or inevitable change, with just working together, fitting, coming together. Is there comfort in death, comfort in change, comfort in endings? Again, maybe this is foreshadowing, Monty, again, to your point. We know the song, we know the story. Am I reading into this a line based on what I already know? Even if I didn't know what was happening, I think it's very interesting to juxtapose those two things together. The death and decay of autumn leaves, but the fitting into a place and feeling secure or I don't forgot the word was already.
Settled.
Settled. Thank you.
Love that you pointed this out, because I always heard this line and thought of it like as a comforting thing, that things were
Right?
falling into place. Like we focus on the falling into place. But now that you point that out, I think one thing that we have to note is she says this line when she's reflecting back on the relationship. She says, I can picture it after all these days. And so you have some reflection that's actually happening long after the relationship is already over. And so now it sounds like this line means, now that this thing is long gone and dead, it makes sense why it fell apart, maybe, or something makes sense. Something about this dead relationship is clicking together, and now I can see it, which is interesting because I really heard this song as a nostalgic reminiscing, not necessarily like she's figured it out. It felt always very much like she was still kind of figuring it out.
Processing. Yeah, she's processing.
Yeah, but it is interesting how that meaning kind of changes from being comforting to now I'm like, oh, she's reflecting on the fact that it's already dead and it's been long gone.
And I too love the fall. So I think this is where I go back and forth. Like, I do find the colors changing of the leaves beautiful and refreshing and comforting. So I don't know that it has to be one or the other. I think it's interesting to think of it as having both perspectives, as something to be in awe of. These autumn leaves falling is beautiful and awe-inspiring, and also that literally symbolizes death and change.
A line that I have always found to be really powerful, even though it's maybe perhaps not the most well-known one, and this conversation is making me understand maybe why I think it's so powerful, is the till we were dead and gone and buried, check the pulse and come back swearing it's the same after 3 months in the grave. And I think to me that has always seemed like a key part of this, that this other person didn't say, okay, let's move on, let's grow. It's the swearing, it's the same, that has always hit me as a, ooh, you've been through stuff. And to say, no, it's the same seems really wrong. And the whole point of fall, and I think there is to me still comfort. Yes, the trees are dying, but it's comfort of this like constant process of growth and change. And so I think of at the end of Red, we get Begin Again, which to me is a very appropriate song for the end of this fall type of album, to say, yes, this all did die. We had fall, but the seasons continue. Things will start new again. But to have someone saying, no, 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 it's the same. It's like hugging a tree in fall that's lost all the leaves and be like, no, 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 no. We can like tape these
We can
leaves
tape them back. No,
up.
you're going to change. And I think that's a really good point, Jen, that autumn, yes, symbolizes death and decay, but it is also part of a cycle that then goes towards rebirth. And so it is not death as the end and dead and gone and buried. It is as death as part of a cycle of rebirth and regeneration.
And later on in her discography, we get lines like, I come back from the dead, I do it all the time. So I don't think I think the key element here in this relationship, it was the refusal to mature, to grow, to come back, because any relationship, you're gonna have those issues, but to say it's the same versus, okay, let's learn from this.
We've changed. We've
this
grown.
didn't go well.
The other two images I want to bring up are, Monty, you brought it up, because in the city's barren cold, I still remember the first fall of snow and how it glistened as it fell. Here, so we were just discussing really the beginning of the song, and now we're towards the end. And this to me felt like a cleansing, like almost a baptism. So we've gone through the back and forth memories of the chaos of this relationship. And here, this always felt very peaceful to me. And this is a verse that was only in the 10-minute version. So it's newer. And again, I see this almost as like, there's one more verse after this, but we're starting towards the resolution of this story, to go back to narratology and the narrative structure. And so as we get towards a resolution of this story, I really saw this snow imagery. And again, maybe it's because I think of falling snow as beautiful, as precious. It felt optimistic and hopeful to me. And I thought that was a very interesting image to use at the end of this song that was not optimistic at all and very devastating and emotional.
Well, and right before it too, you also have a fire imagery with the twin
Ooh.
flame, which is
I
a
missed that. Good call.
metaphor for soulmates, but it's still a flame. It's a fire. So did the twin flame bruise paint you blue? So you have this fire imagery and then you have this blue. Did the love affair maim you too? Because in the city's barren cold. So you're getting this
Contrast.
juxtaposition, of something hot, something that was on fire. If you talk about flames, those are all love imagery, but then you move into did it paint you blue, into the barren cold. And again, they can't decide what they are.
No.
It's just this constant inability to sit in the relationship.
Just going back to one thing really fast, the idea of bringing up the first fall of snow in that context with the barren city, I think, Jody, there is definitely something there to it, because the city being barren is a very strong imagery, but even referencing first fall of snow takes you back in time. So it's very clearly not in that present moment. And it creates that contrast there to what you were saying of now the city is barren, but that first fall of snow is what was memorable and it was different. And so I think the way that she has really, and we talked about this in narratology with Jen, is she keeps taking the thing forward, but it's just one word that is placed there that completely changes the meaning. Like, she could have talked about the snow and its many qualities in a different way, but she has to reference that it's not like that now. It was like that back in the day. I think using nature with that time element to really hone in on a feeling, I think is kind of key.
Well, and the word barren too, I haven't really thought about it until now, is from a nature point of view. If you talk about barren land, it's land that cannot produce vegetation. It cannot grow anything. It is essentially lifeless.
It is dead,
Which
yeah.
a city is normally going to be kind of barren because, like, concrete, but it's still, the word choice is an incredibly intentional nature imagery to say nothing is going to grow here. This is dead. This is lifeless. And we just need to move on from it. You can't really fix barren lands. It's just time and nature that can sometimes fix it, but you're not going to fix it in that moment.
And it's very dramatic language for actually just jumping back to the last section. She talked about 3 months. Like, this song talks about how I know it's long gone, indicating the relationship has been gone for a while. But actually, in the last section that we were talking about, she also mentions that it was 3 months later.
Yeah, check the pulse and come back swearing it's the same after 3 months in the grave.
Yeah, after 3 months in the grave. So we're talking barren city, like really dramatic endings, long gone, but it's not actually that long. It's only been gone for 3 months. It sounds like this relationship has been in the grave for 3 months, which isn't actually that far removed from a relationship that was so pivotal and so moving. Like, clearly this speaker was really impacted by this relationship, but it hasn't actually been over as long as we think based on the song lyrics.
I don't know, this is where I'd need to do the narratology exercise that Jen mentioned and like put together the timing, because I don't know, to me I read the 3 months in the grave as there was like a 3-month break where they were broken up and then they got back together and then who knows what happened. And so I don't quite know on the timing there. But I do agree with you that we're looking back, things still feel fresh. And I don't think it's that long. Maybe it's long gone, as in it is so far gone, this can never be resuscitated, but maybe not long in terms of amount of time.
Time itself, I might argue time could be a nature-y thing to discuss because it's
Ooh.
a very big part of the natural world, which we don't have to get too much into it because time is something we don't have a ton of on this. We don't want to do a 7-hour episode, but I do think that time won't fly. It's like I'm paralyzed by it. We have this timeline. It's not the most, it's kind of confusing, but then the narrative structure, she's constantly going back and forth, but in the present day, time is paralyzed. She can't move forward. And so I think there's that too of how time felt like it flew. We have all of these multiple different things in the past, but then in the present day, that's where we're repeating things. That's where we're repeating the emotions, which was an unintentionally very good transition into Monty's section.
Well, before we get into Monty's section, I also have a good transition, which is the last nature term I wanted to bring up, which was wind in my hair. Wind is the last element that she really talks about, and it is repeated again and again, I think 4 times in the last stanza. I won't go into it too much because I think we'll talk about it in Monty's, but I see wind as this invisible force that causes movement without warning. It causes change. You can't see it, you can only feel it. And I will leave us with that because I think I can talk about it more when Monty goes into her topic.
Okay, I did poetic repetition. It's not strictly a literary theory, but it is a literary device. And honestly, when I was going through this song, I kind of was tempted to just do all rhetorical strategies. We don't deep dive this song, but she uses so many incredible rhetorical devices in the telling of this narrative that I feel like we can do a lot with that and potentially even do its own episode. I try to call out a few through the lens of repetition. This is storytelling. As we've discussed so far, she is narrating something that has happened to us. She is taking us on a journey. But one of the things that she does to do that so effectively is use repetition throughout the song. Now, compared to some of the other songs that we did when we did poetic repetition in one of our previous episodes, I think it's not as obvious. I think in the past we discussed stay, 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 or things with a lot of repetition together. This song is not like that. It feels like she's really narrating a more complicated story, taking you through memories. We've talked about positive and negatives, but the repetition is definitely still there in a few different ways. So, for example, there is alliteration, which is the repetition of sounds that she uses several times. One example that I've got is so casually cruel in the name of being honest. You've got casually and cruel. And then she says, I'm a crumpled up piece of paper. So she brings back that C sound of crumpled up again in the next line. She does this in almost every stanza.
The barren cold.
Yeah, exactly. There's first fall of snow. There's the twin flame bruise paint you blue. Brooklyn broke my skin and bones. Lot of lines where she just picks a letter and goes into it with the same sound repeated over and over again. Alliteration in music creates a little bit of a rhythm. In literature, it also is there for emphasis. So this is an angry song, especially when she sings it. By the end of the song, you're kind of screaming the lyrics, and some of that alliteration and repetition of sounds really helps drive that anger in many ways. You're emphasizing the sound again and again and again. And when you're arguing, you're using this device or that repetition of sounds kind of lends itself to create more emphasis on what you're saying. So that's one example of a kind of repetition. But then there's also lines that are repeated again and again. So we talked about how with every chorus, she moves this story forward. And the way that you signal a chorus is always through repetition. There have to be some things that are the same, and then there's some things that change. And in this particular song, she keeps repeating, because there we are again, or here we are again. And that brings us back to the chorus every time, but then something changes. There's something different every time, which is what is moving the actual story forward. And then there's repetition, like I remember it. It comes at the end of the lines, because here we are again, or there we are again is at the beginning, but I remember it kind of closes the chorus in some ways. And when she says a memory, she wraps it up with I remember it over and over again, and it kind of builds up towards the end. But once again, by repeating this line over and over again, she is adding emphasis to this and really almost cementing the story.
The I remember it all too well repetition is really, to me, I think what brings the devastation, the emotional devastation in this story. And to tie it back to Jen's conversation around narratology, like that's what gives us the sense that these are vignettes of memories and gives us the sense of time, because this is really what makes it feel like post-breakup reflection and thinking about everything. Like, I remember it all too well. I can still feel all of it. I can see us dancing around the kitchen and running down the stairs. I can feel, keeping you like an oath, like a sacred prayer. And the repetition of I remember it all too well is itself almost prayer-like, right? In prayers, you are often repeating a line or a word or a phrase again and again. And the repetition of I remember it all too well, to me, feels sacred. I don't know. There's a deep emotional pain and feeling in that line every single time.
Yeah.
And in its repetition.
She says, down the stairs, I was there,
Sacred prayer, I was there.
I'm glad you brought up the prayerness of it. I was going to talk about the outro, because the outro just takes repetition to a whole different level. That's where everything comes together, and everything that she repeated is all put together in one place without any of the middle stuff in there. It's like you cut out all of the stories that change and just take the repetition, put it all in the end, and that's kind of the outro. One thing, though, before we get into the outro, which is an important piece to discuss with repetition, is it's not just I remember it all too well or you remember it all too well. She also says you remember it all. I remember it all. So she uses it with the title of the song, but she also just sprinkles it throughout. And I think the importance of repetition between the remembering it and because there we are again, I think those two phrases are kind of acting like bookends. Every time she says a memory, she kind of closes it up with these two lines that come into the chorus, especially, and says, because here we are again, and then she says, I remember it. That's kind of how she is bookmarking all of the points of reflection on these memories in many ways.
I want to talk about Casually Cruel for just a quick second, because she does have that repetition, and usually if there's repetition in something as poetic as this, it's a sign to look at it. And I think that line is incredibly important because it's doing this subverting your expectations. Casual is something you do offhanded. You're not thinking of it. Cruel means to intentionally harm someone. So casually cruel is just an insane combination of words that to that person it was casual, they weren't trying that hard, but it was cruel, which is an intentional infliction of pain. And then 2 lines later we get repetition again of because I remember it all too well. She's doing that, playing with it right there.
That section is devastating. And you call me up again just to break me like a promise, so casually cruel in the name of being honest. I'm a crumpled up piece of paper lying here because I remember it all. That alone would be a poem. And yet it is 4 lines in this epic 10-minute song.
Yeah. To the point of why it sticks out, I mean, yes, there's the meaning of it that if you dig deeper, you're like, wow, she's really playing with these ideas, contrasting ideas, putting them together. But I think the reason it sticks out to Jen, your point, is that repetition. This line sticks out in everyone's head because the sounds stick out.
It's satisfying. It sounds satisfying.
We're drawing attention to casually cruel, crumpled up, cause I remember it all. That k sound, and I think it's the same with the B sounds that I was talking with, the Brooklyn broke my skin and bones. That's another line where did the twin flame bruise paint you blue? It's the B sound again.
It's very satisfying.
Over and over again.
It's like a professor repeating something in class, and you're like, "Oh, that's probably going to be on the test."
Yeah. When they say it more than once or more than twice, you're like, "I should pay attention to that."
Yeah, the other kind of rhyme or the other kind of repetition is actually in the rhyme too. So we talked about alliteration, which is the sound that start off the words. We talked about actual lines that are being repeated, but then there's also the actual rhyme structure. Whenever she wants to draw emphasis, she also uses, I mean, this is a song, so of course there's rhyming, but I feel like in this song in particular, she's used the rhyme to really play with rhythm. Sacred prayer, and we'd swear, all's well that ends well, but I'm in a new hell. There's a lot of playing with sounds. It's a long song, and so the way that she has put that repetition of sounds throughout that song is very important in terms of creating sections and rhythm, just even with the words. So just a really clever use of repetition that way, repeating the actual sounds.
Yeah, that the internal rhyme where it's not the end word of each line that rhymes with each other, it's within. So you get it to a never needy, ever lovely jewel.
Yes.
That's
And playing
another
with a
gem.
never and ever.
Yeah.
Gem of a line.
A
Yeah.
jewel of a line, if you
A
will.
jewel, yes.
Yeah.
Well done.
And then that takes us to the outro. We got into this a little bit, but I just think you can't talk about rhyme without really just focusing on the outro of this song. One thing that she repeats here, there's an anaphora, which was a kind of rhyme that we talked about in a kind of repetition that we talked about in our Poetic Repetition episode. She repeats the word just between us. So a reminder, anaphora is when you have multiple lines and you keep starting the line with the same set of words. And she says, just between us, did the lump of hair maim you all too well? Just between us, do you remember it all too well? Just between us, I remember it. And then just between us repeat even in the background. This is interesting to me because there is nothing just between the two of them here.
I was just going to say that.
This song became one of her most popular songs. It's sung on every tour. She does talk about how it started off as something that she wrote just to get emotions out, and it became a song that kind of became something for the fans. But there's a little bit of irony there. This idea of somebody, I mean, this is a song that the fans scream. There's thousands of people in a stadium, and everyone is screaming every lyric to the song. And here you have just between us emphasized by repeating it 3 times right at the close of the song. Because what? Like, to me, this is like the kind of question is, why does she emphasize this? It's supposed to be between her and another person. When you say just between us, that implies there were 2 people in a conversation. It was like a secret. It was something personal. It was something really that only those 2 people would understand. But when you put it in the context of kind of how the song takes life and how it's a very, very public version of storytelling, there's nothing that's actually just between us here, right? It's now just between us and the thousands and millions of people around the world. So it's interesting to me that she emphasized that over and over again in the song, because maybe that gives us some insight into the way that the song was originally written. It was maybe meant to be just between us, or it was meant to feel really personal. But by repeating it 3 times at the beginning of these phrases, it leaves an impact and it makes you feel like the song is very, very personal.
Technically, it's also an epistrophe where it's repeating the end words too. Just between us, different middle, all too well. Just between us, do you remember it? All too well. Just between us, I remember it all too well. So she's repeating the beginning and the end. And then the rest of the outro is all epistrophe because it all ends with I was there, I was there. So it's both epizeuxis and epistrophe.
Yes.
Go back and listen to the original episode if you want to know more about those.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why this outro is really key, because this whole thing it's like you've cut out the rest of the song and you've just left in what begins these repetitive phrases and what ends the repetitive phrases, and you've put them all together in this one
And the
outro.
3 things that she's repeating: wind in my hair, down the stairs, and sacred prayer. Those are very interesting phrases to repeat within the context of the song. Wind in my hair, I go back to the eco-critical theory element. Wind is something forceful, invisible. You can't see it. You can only feel it. You've got that nature imagery. Down the stairs, we go into the domestic sphere, something, being in a house, in a home. And then sacred prayer, religious. I don't have an answer. I love the juxtaposition of those 3 things that then get repeated again and again and again.
I love that.
Which means they're important. So we should look at them.
To me, this is like the bringing together of all 3 of our lenses, actually, because it's the narratology element there of how you're progressing the song forward. These three lines bring together the different sections of the story, everything that we talked about. There's definitely the eco-criticism lens, because where it's taking place and where it's being referenced there you're absolutely right. There's nature, there's the home spirit, and then there's the spiritual sphere, kind of like different places that people operate in. And then the repetition is also a repetition of sound. These are all rhyming lines that she uses in all the previous choruses, and she's bringing them together here. And there is the repetition of sound. Obviously, they're rhymes, and that's why it creates this rhythm when you hear this over and over and over again. And the way that the music kind of fades out here, the repeated chanting, this kind of goes to what you were saying earlier, Jody, that it feels very much like a prayer, this entire outro. Just like in hymns or in chants, you would have this kind of repetition of sound and rhyme. She's chanting this over and over and over again until the music.
Chanting is a great word. It's a chant.
Yeah.
Yeah, normally a love story, if we talk about narratology, would end with and they lived happily ever after. And in this song, we end with wind in my hair, down the stairs, sacred prayer, it was rare. And then the final line, and all of these stanzas of the outro break from that repetition to it was where you remember it. Which is
like
that an accusation?
Yeah.
It's
an accusation, because a lot of this song, this whole thing is I remember it. A couple times she goes, do you remember it? But really it's I remember it. It's about her. It's about the narrator and her experience. And again, going back to Jen, what you said, like the exercise of like, write this, could you write this from the other person's perspective? That last line is either an accusation or a dare. Like, do you remember it? What's your memory of this whole experience? And I bet it would not look the same.
Well, I think the accusation kind of implies that you can deny it, but it is the same. I think this whole song began with I remember it, but also you've still got my scarf. I was the one true thing you ever loved. I think it's, to me, this song, and I guess we're backing up out of our individual theories and looking at this from a little bit more macro lens. For me, this song was always telling the story of how somebody might be in denial about something that happened. The other person is not in denial about it, but wants that admission that you do remember it. And so speaker is saying, here are all the things I remember, and don't deny it. You remember it too. You can try to move on. You can act like it doesn't affect you, but it obviously does.
I think when I look at this song, memory is fallible. Like, we know that we can remember things different. Two people can remember an experience very differently, both because our memories change, but also because we have two different perspectives. We're like the same way the three of us, every single time we do a song, we come to it with three very different experiences, and that changes what we see and experience in a song, which is what makes this really fun. I think that looking at this song through the three different lenses that we just did, yes, makes me see it as all right, let me think about how I want to phrase this. Looking at the song through the three different lenses that we just did makes me see this song even more as one person's experience, because there are tent poles of things that are universal, and I think the nature elements are those tent poles. Of it was fall, there was snow, there was wind, but how you experience those changes, right? The same way, Jen, I was like, oh, it's cold, that's negative, and you're like, no, I actually kind of like the cold. So I think there's things that happened and you can't deny that they happened, but how you experience them and how you remember them and what they mean to you change. And I think that's what I see the more that I look into this song. I see this is one person's experience and her memory and what she remembers and feels. That doesn't mean that that's what the other person feels or remembers. But that also doesn't matter. What matters is that this person's account of the story, because this is the account that we're getting.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yet I do feel that this person, for this person, for the speaker, it does matter that the other person remembers it, because part of the song is that it feels like the speaker is trying to jog a memory, or the person is being accusing and saying, I was there, I remember it, don't deny that you remember it too. So whether the other person does remember it or not, I agree that as a third person, it actually doesn't matter, but it does feel like it really matters to the speaker in the moment. The speaker is kind of desperate to make the other person remember, and that's something, or that's maybe the purpose of the song in this moment. The speaker is trying to convince the other person that how can you not remember it?
Well, in the same way that we took 3 different lenses to look at the song and it illuminated different things, I think that's part of what makes Red such an enduring album. Is it is multiple songs about what feels like the same relationship. They aren't necessarily all, but it even artistically seems like it's different points of views from inside and outside of a particular relationship, and we get a wide range of completely different songs, which to your point, Jody, is like this is an incredibly powerful song. This isn't the only way to look at this experience, and I think that that is seen within the wider context of where we were even given the song on a larger album, that it seems to be taking different viewpoints of the same experience, and some of them are happy and some of them are sad and some of them are angry. And to me, that's what makes Red such a compelling album. Is it's so hard to capture the wide range of the human experience in one song, and then so instead we got an album that focuses in close on something and then goes from all the different angles.
The one thing that I did want to kind of wrap with is, in addition to the different things that we use to examine this, I mentioned it earlier, but there's so many rhetorical strategies that she uses in the writing of this song. I mean, it really is truly an incredible poem. I wanted to draw attention to just one other thing that she does in a few different verses, which is, I think it's an antithesis, but Jen, like, I'd love your thoughts and I'd love to be pushed and challenged, where she puts two phrases together where it's using the same idea, but she kind of flips what she's saying. So for example, you taught me about your past, thinking your future was me. It's not quite an antithesis, but I was kind of struggling to find it. The idea that in these two phrases, you're repeating the same idea. We're talking about past, present, future, but we're playing with if you did this in your past, thinking about the future was me. She does this again in...
Well, past and future, I do think is definitely antithesis. The idea of an antithesis as a rhetorical device is taking things that are basically opposites. One of the definitions, just scrolling through, I think from Encyclopedia Britannica, is irreconcilable opposites. And you cannot reconcile the past and the future. There is no way that those two things will overlap. They are always constantly on the opposite. So I think that's definitely there, of two completely different things that can never be reconciled. And she is playing with that idea of the past is one thing, the future is another, which is true. But then is it with me? But then now we know it wasn't. So you continue to play with these opposites, these unexpected turns. She does a lot of the unexpected twists in the way she's playing with the words in this album, this song.
Yeah, she uses antithesis several times, I think, to just move the story forward, where will say one thing and then flip it or play with those words. I think there's just a lot to be said about how all in she went on this as a poem. There's a lot of different devices. There's wordplay, there's sounds, there's rhymes, there's there's the actual narration, storytelling part. So I feel like we could have gone on. One of the other things was the use of a lot of rhetorical questions, which we will talk about in a future episode. But I think, to me, just acknowledging the fact that this is everybody's favorite song. We got a 10-minute version and it was our favorite song. Such a masterpiece. And it's not just by coincidence. That when we study rhetorical strategies, especially when it comes to writing, it's manipulation of the English language. It's using certain strategies, knowingly or unknowingly, to cause impact. And the fact that this particular song is just full of them, it's very intelligently written. There's a reason why this song really resonates and is such a favorite. It's because it's very cleverly done. And so just wanted to take that opportunity to tie the fact that there's a lot of strategies that are used knowingly or unknowingly that ultimately lend themselves to the impact that a poem can have.
Well, follow us on Substack. We can subscribe for free, and maybe this week's Substack we will break down some more of those rhetorical devices in this song and see examples of them, so you can see more there.
And share my highly annotated copy of these lyrics.
Well, that's all we have for now for AP Taylor Swift, All Too Well 10-minute version. Join us next week as we dive into some more songs from Taylor Swift and see what we can analyze.
That's all we have for you today on AP Taylor Swift. Be sure to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on your social channel of choice at AP Taylor Swift to stay up to date. And join us next time as we overanalyze and deep dive into the next Taylor Swift song on AP Taylor Swift.